In terms of getting on board with this film, I mean, I understand you got a military background. You were actually in the military at 17, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was drafted at 17. Yeah. I was in the military for 2 years then, which was a strange experience. I guess I related to Ender's Game in a way. I read the book when I was an adult, and I have friends who've read it when they were kind of 11 years old, and it fascinates me how it almost doesn't matter at what age you are when you read the book. It has an impact, and for very different reasons. You know, my one producer, Bob Orsi, read it when he was 11, and he talks about how it really inspired him because he was quite bullied quite a lot, and he was obviously a very bright kid, and he found, okay, wait, this book's telling me that there are ways to lead and succeed through intelligence rather than physical strength. For me, having been drafted at 17, I really related to this idea of being taken thousands of miles away from your home and have people yelling and screaming at you, and then wanting to praise you for almost the part of your personality that your mother would really not want praised, your more aggressive side. And that's very confusing for a young person, where aggression is being praised and encouraged when you're 17 or 18. Because that's really not a good way to function in the world, in the civilian world. And I think that's why soldiers have a lot of difficulty adapting. They've been in one world and they have to come live in another world, and it's quite tricky on your psyche. So I love the fact that Ender's Game has this great idea about the idea that we have this tremendous capacity as human beings for compassion and kindness, but we have an equal and opposite capacity for terrible violence and aggression. And how do we reconcile those two? And I love the fact that Ender Wiggin is not a perfect character. He's flawed. He's not. This is not a film about a good kid who, something terrible happens to and he has to set the world right. No, the kid himself may not be all good. He certainly has within him the capacity to do bad things, and he has the sister Valentine, who is compassionate. He has the brother Peter, who's violent. And which way is he going to go? And so I love the idea of a journey for a young person of self-discovery, and the way in a very cool and exciting environment with cool, battle rooms and simulation caves and all of those big, wonderful visuals that make the movie really fun visually to direct and hopefully to watch. You also have at its center a really strong character-driven piece. Right.
And I mean, when you got the chance to direct this, was there any hesitation? I mean,
no. No. The book was at Warner Brothers for many, many years, and there were a number of attempts to make it, and it was quite humbling because I can do this, and then when I finally got the chance to adapt it, I went, oh, okay, this isn't easy. This is really, I see why folks have struggled with this, and boy, I hope I'm going to be able to pull this off. Because, for many reasons, it's a very internal book. It tells you a lot about what the character's thinking. Movies, unless you have a lot of hokey voiceover, which is usually not very nice to hear, are about the way characters react and what they say and what they do. So you have to find ways in a film of creating the same sense of what a character is thinking and feeling through other means. But you want to be true to the spirit of that character in a different medium. So that's a challenge. The other challenge is it's a very long book. So are you going to tell a story from the age of 6 to 13 and cast a 6-year-old actor and then an 8-year-old and then a 10-year-old? I very quickly abandoned that idea because it's really hard to change your allegiance to an actor every 15 minutes in a film. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to compress this thing into a 1-year time period. And we shot in sequence. So young Asa Butterfield was 12 years old, and then he was 13 or so by the time we finished. He grew 2 inches, which was something the wardrobe department was like, getting him into this battle room suit, and it's not fitting anymore. But what was also great about that was, when he arrived on set and he meets Harrison Ford. And it's perfect because in the movie it's Ender Wiggin up against Colonel Graf, and on the set it's Asa Butterfield up against Harrison Ford, and shooting in sequence meant that natural intimidation factor was really useful for me as a director. And Harrison was fantastic. The way he was very generous with the kids, but he also didn't kind of goof around with Asa. I don't want to say he stayed in character, but he certainly stayed, he kept that slightly strange dynamic going, while at the same time being very generous. And by the end of the shooting, they were really close, and Asa was much more confident, which was perfect because by the end of the film, as you know, he really goes up against Graf. So that was fun.
Well, I mean, I'm wondering in terms, I mean, the casting is, I could talk to you at length about the casting, but I'm also wondering, I mean, what was your proudest moment? I mean, there must have been quite a few, I'm sure, in terms of bringing this all together, but what for you was your proudest thing from this film?
I think what I love about the film, and I'm proud of in the film, is that there are two reasons to do it for a director. One is it's got fantastic visual opportunities. This battle room and creating the zero-G world and designing those sets. And, I remember in the book, the battle room is a black box, dark room.
Right.
And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I'm taking these kids up into space and they're going to be in a dark black box room. Why am I in space? So I go in one day with this wacky idea, which I'm really proud of, to my production design. I say, I want a big glass sphere. And I want to jump out into the sphere and I want to see space. I want to be as close to being really in space as I can. And the sphere, it's just out there and we can see beyond. And I remember them going, okay. And the visual effects guys going, that kind of pushes the budget up a little. Okay, so now we've got to sell it. We're going to do previs, we're going to design it, we're going to sell it. We're going to sell it to the financiers. Thank you, financiers, for buying that idea. And the second one that I'm really proud of from a visual point of view is what to do in the final act when he engages in battle, which is really a video game.
Right.
And how could you make that exciting? And I was sitting with my kids at the planetarium one day, and it goes dark and there's this huge projector and it suddenly projects stars all around you in 3D. Oh, that's it. We have to create a video game. And I was also watching a conductor one day conducting, and just the energy that went into getting this huge orchestra to do what he needed. Those two ideas, this idea of standing in the middle of a big, giant circular space and conducting a battle that's happening all around you in 3 dimensions, and then being able to move that battle in a sort of ultra iPad version idea. You're not just doing this, you're actually doing this, and the world's expanding. So that was a lot of fun to choreograph and to figure out. So I'm proud of those from a visual point of view, but I think what I'm most proud of is that this is a great character-driven story. At the end of the day, it's set in a fantastic world, but it's still about a young kid discovering who he is and trying to figure out which part of his personality is really going to win through. Is his capacity for compassion and kindness going to triumph over his equal but opposite capacity for violence and aggression? This is not a perfect kid. Ender is not a good kid who's been wronged, trying to set the world right. It's just not simple. He's a kid struggling with his own moral identity. And he's up against some great characters like Sir Ben Kingsley and Harrison Ford and Viola Davis. And so I'm very proud of those character dynamics.
Right. Well, I love the fact that, from my interpretation of your career, that not easy topics is a common thing for you. That it's not about black and white, cut and dry. And do you seek out that kind of story when you begin directing a new film?
That's a great question. I think all storytellers or filmmakers are drawn, whether they mean to be or not, to certain themes that resonate somewhere in their own psyche, somewhere in their own messed up head, right? And I seem to be drawn to stories in which characters wrestle somewhat with their own nature. And I guess that's part of my background, and having been drafted at an early age and having lost a friend in the war in Angola, and just a lot of things that you're trying to figure out why, and knowing that you have the capacity for great compassion, and you also have the capacity to get really, angry as a human being. And I seem to be drawn to stories about characters that are wrestling with some sort of, moral identity crisis. God, what am I, a shrink now? This is too much. I'm really not a great fan of simple good versus evil stories. I think it's actually a dangerous philosophy. I mean, for me, that whole George Bush era of good versus evil. Well, if I'm good, then can I do no evil? Right. If you only see yourself as good, then how do you ever analyze your own capacity for doing something bad? And we all have that capacity.
Right.
So yes, I'm drawn to more, I think, grey areas of grey themes.
Awesome. Would you ever consider trying to tackle in some way the Ender sequel books? I mean, I realize that's a tough question.
It's a really tough question. Now, I'll tell you, I'll try and answer it as quickly as I can. First of all, in terms of a sequel, as a director, I got to be honest, thinking about the sequel when you're making a film just feels really like you're going to jinx the film you're making.
Right.
I'm just focused on trying to make a good film, and if the film works and a sequel follows, that'd be great.
Right.
There is, of course, a challenge in making a sequel to Ender's Game in the sense that the sequel, Speaker for the Dead, barely involves the characters in the story Ender's Game. So
yeah,
I've been focused on the story of Ender's Game. Let's see if that does well, and if that happens, I'm sure there might be some conversation about a sequel.
Would you be interested in as a director? Would you be interested in trying to find a story there?
Yes, I certainly I would be interested if we could find a story in which we could take at least substantially the cast we have and move them forward, because
right.
in films people bond to those characters,
right.
and that will be the challenge if there is a sequel.
Great. Well,
All right.
thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much.